One of the primary things I like to do in my music over the years is work with odd meters or unusual subdivisions of normal meters and combine them with theme and variation and unusual techniques. Even with a simple meter like 4/4, which is normally just subdivided 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. There's a piece of mine called Clairvoyant, which has a rhythm like this. Now, that's not quite so unusual by itself. Lots of people have subdivided that 3 plus 3 plus 2. But I do the same thing with the melody. And it's a matter of when I find a rhythm, I improvise with it. And I try to see if there's a melody that will fit into that rhythm. If it does, I save it and I work with it. And if it doesn't, I toss it away and try something else. But this one happened to work. So the basic pattern gets set up. And then this melody comes in. So the melody too is 3 plus 2. And then when I get to the next section, I try doing the right hand in 4/4 while keeping the left hand in this 3 plus 3 plus 2, which is 8/8 instead. And what I like about that is that if you're playing that by itself, it sounds like the squarest thing in the world. It sounds like the most normal thing. But when you put it against the basic rhythm, it sounds odd and it sounds unfamiliar in a way. So it reminds me of something that the playwright Jonathan Larson, who did Rent, reminds me of. He used to have something above his desk that said, "Make the new familiar and make the familiar new." And I think that's what I try to do in everything. That's kind of a motto to live by, and as an artist for me. Something else that's another piece of mine, the same kind of idea, one of the simplest combinations of polyrhythm, or two rhythms at one time, is 3/4 against 6/8. And in this piece, the right hand goes back and forth in the first part between 3/4 and 6/8. I think it's the opposite here, 6/8 plus 3/4. But in the left hand, I do exactly the opposite. Again, so what's going on is the right hand in 6/8 and then 3/4, and the left hand exactly the opposite. And for me, that's about taking two very simple things, putting them on top of each other and making it sound complex, or not complex, richer and deeper. And then I add to the level of complexity. This is an experiment I tried for this piece, which is called My Right Foot on the Other Hand, is that I wanted to see if I could keep the melody almost identical all the way through the piece and create variation by just changing the accompaniment. Normally you do the opposite. You keep the accompaniment the same and you create variations on top of it. But I wanted to see if it would work. If it didn't, I would throw it away, and if it did, I would save it. And I thought it worked, so I saved it. Now, I don't keep the right hand exactly the same. I add chords I changed the registration, but basically it's the same melody all the way through the piece. But the first level of variation is keeping the right hand in 3/4. But I'm putting the left hand in 5/4. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So put them together and you get. So again, just taking two simple things, putting them together and creating something different. And then I just turned that around. Instead of the left hand playing 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, and I change it to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So the next variation is. And then I decide to up the ante by changing the left hand to 10/8, so it's. And the right hand is still in going back and forth between 3/4 and 6/8. Some people ask me, how can you do that? It seems like rubbing your head and stamping your foot and licking your tongue at the same time. How do you lick your tongue? I don't even know how you do that. But anyway, for me, it seems to be a natural thing and that I've developed over time. And it's something that I love to do. I love to hear things that way, and I love to play them that way, and it sounds natural to me. I also love odd meters. Odd meters are one of the great traditions in Eastern European music, and the accordion is a part of so many of those cultures. Macedonian, Serbian, Romanian, and Gypsy culture. The 7/8 is the most popular, and I've used that a lot, but I like to talk about some of the more remote ones, or ones that are not used as much, that I particularly like. I particularly like 9/8. 9/8 is, to me, is endearing because it can either be divided as a fast waltz plus a slow waltz. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. That's from a piece of mine called Grooved Shoulders. I have another 9/8 one called Soft Landing. That's also same pattern. 1, 2, 3, 1 and 2 and 3 and 1. But I add to the complexity a little bit by doing dotted rhythms in the right hand, so that it kind of floats over the whole thing instead of just literally playing the rhythm of the left hand. like about that is instead of driving home the rhythm, instead of driving home it just floats above the whole thing, kind of dreamlike. It's like two parallel planets, and I love the feeling of that. Just recently, about 2 or 3 years ago, which for me is recent because I'm older, is that I was at the MacDowell Colony doing a residency, and I was trying to find, I said, well, I've worked with 9/8 a lot, but I'd like to find a new way into it. And I've used slow waltz, fast waltz, slow waltz. I wonder if there's any other way. And I found this other pattern, and I used it for a piece called The Swan and the Vulture. And there follows a series of course, variations on that. One of which actually uses that floating dotted rhythm. So I rip myself off once in a while too, or quite often actually. Now, if you had a chance to hear that subdivision is, I'll just play the rhythm again. 1 2 1 2 3 1 2 1 2 1 2 1 2 3 1 2 1 2. Or sometimes you could hear it as also 2 plus 3 plus 4, so that the phrase feels like it's getting longer and longer. 1 2 1 2 3 1 2 3 4 1 2 1 2 3 1 2 3. And I like that feeling of a gradual lengthening of the phrase, and it led to a melody that I particularly liked, and that became a fertile well for some variations. I've also written things in 11/8 and 13/8. One of my favorites is 15/8, which sounds like it's really complicated, but actually it's not. It's like 2/4/4 measures, but with 1/8 note chopped off on the end. So it's kind of a little peg leg vibe. I've used this a number of different times. Most recently in a piece called Little Big Top. The basic rhythm is Little Big Top is a tribute to say Ennio Morricone. I love him too, but it's not a tribute to him. It's a tribute to Nino Rota, who wrote the music for the Fellini films. And this is the basic rhythm. So it's 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 1 and 2 and 3 and so a little hop at the end. So 15/8. I also used it in a slower piece called Where's the Tan Go? This kind of theming variation is something that I've been working with for years, and I do it in a lot of different ways. Rhythmic variation, stylistic variation. There's a piece of mine called Scenes from a Mirage, in which the whole piece is based on the way a film score used to be, old-fashioned film score used to be put together, like changing the genre for pieces, for sections of the piece, so that they have a completely different feel. The piece kind of starts off. a little excerpt from that. And it goes on with a little Tex-Mex variation on it. Demon Variations, my go-to when I'm in trouble. Probably 40 years ago, I studied bagpipe for a very little while. And you start off on the chanter, which is just the little flute part of it, before you move on to the bag. I never made it to the bag. It's too much work. I was already trying to still learn how to play accordion in my 20s and 30s and now my 70s. But what I got out of it that really helped me compositionally is that when you play bagpipe, you can't play the same note 2 times in a row because it's a steady stream of air. So the only way you can play the same note 2 times in a row is by breaking it up with a grace note. So I don't know how to reiterate it. It's that you can't stop the flow of the air or you get no tone. So they've developed this whole elaborate system of ornamentation based on that limitation, which is really beautiful. I mean, see there? You can't do that, so. And they have a very particular scale too, which is different than, it has a flat 7. So I live right next to a church, and there are a lot of, unfortunately, a lot of funerals, but also a lot of wedding celebrations, and a lot of them are Irish Catholic celebrations. So there'll be a bagpipe, a solo bagpiper, or a bagpiper and drum ensemble. And so sometimes I get to hear some very familiar tunes, but with the wrong note. They don't have the sharp 7, so they have to substitute another note. So I'll be like working on my computer and I'll hear this tune. Whoa! This flat 7 comes up and it just, whoa, it rocks my system. So I haven't used that. But anyway, what I have used is the ornamentations. Normally Western ornamentations, like from Baroque music, have to do with an adjacent note. So if you're playing... or a trill. But with bagpipe music, it can be quite far away notes. You can even have a melody that's forming below that. So I've used that in a number of pieces. I think the first piece that I wrote after the bagpipe studies that illustrates it is called Loosening Up the Queen. And that goes something like this. The other thing I like about that is when you're playing notes on accordion in the very high register, I don't know if you can catch it on audio recording, but there's a low drone that seems to be going on the whole time. And I'm not actually playing that. It's what's called difference tones. And difference tones are a psychoacoustic phenomenon where if you combine two notes in the high register and you play them loud enough, on certain instruments, they will play the difference tone. In other words, if you have 4,000 and 2,000, it will play double the 2,000 one, or a better one would be like, say, 700 and 500. 7 minus 5. You will get the 200 drone going on beneath, which most of us can't hear, but that's theoretical. So that's a beautiful aspect of playing in a very high range of the accordion with lots of space below for the difference tones to come through and really sing. Let me try to find a couple that are really ring out so that you can hear them happening. So here again, there's two tones. They're a fifth apart, and you'll hopefully be able to hear this subtone happening way beneath. And you can see I'm not playing my left hand, and I'm only playing those two notes. So myself, I can hear this moving bass line. So there you have not only difference tones, but beating tones, because the fifth is not completely in tune, which is one of the organic beauties of the accordion. There's like over 200 reeds in here, so the chances of them all being in tune at the same time are none to less than none, so it's part of its charm. But you can also do beautiful things just by playing the single reed by itself, the single high reed by itself. For a project of John Zorn's called Great Jewish Music, Burt Bacharach, he asked me to contribute some pieces to that, and I did. And one of them was called One Less Bell to Answer. And I did that just taking the notes of the melody, stripping away all the harmonies and all the rhythms, and taking the bell tones as an image for myself, and did them all in the high register. And there's no bass at all in this piece. Another thing that one can be achieved, kind of a special technique can be achieved on accordion, you have to work on it a little though, is a binaural beating, which is, you know, accordions are tuned in many different ways. This one is tuned what we call dry tuning, which means there's no tremolo built into it. But you can kind of achieve it if you engage one switch. This is the one with 2 reeds in unison, and then you half engage the single switch. You're kind of opening the valves halfway, and here's the single reed by itself. Here's the 2 middle reeds. You get a little bit of beating there, but then if you play with it, you can make the beating more pronounced. And in the early 70s, 72, it's like the earliest piece that I keep in my repertoire whenever I have 4 accordions together. I wrote a piece called Toronto Sevens, and that whole piece was built around that phenomenon. Here's just a little excerpt of it because it's like 30 minutes long. That was at a time when it was the end of 3 years of study using electronic music a lot. I was studying with Morton Subotnick at the time, and he was one of the real innovators on the Buchla synthesizer. And with the synthesizer, you had to decide how you would create the sound from the beginning, because all you had was 3 kinds of waves. You had a sine wave, a square tooth wave, and a sawtooth wave. And you know, you didn't have presets for like clarinet and oboe and all that we'd have now with sampling. So I really got into the nature of sound, and the way I translated it into accordion was by doing long tones and exploring the insides of the tones. And with Toronto Sevens, I really got into that, creating complex harmonies and letting the beating within the sound world create its own sub universe of sounds. When you produce any kind of vibration sound on accordion like this, this is the simplest one that we learned to play expressively with, as an expressive use of tremolo with the accordion. Now, the reason I'm calling it a tremolo instead of a vibrato is the pitch doesn't actually change. When you play a vibrato on the violin or on a wind instrument or as a vocalist, the pitch changes, and that's where the vibrato comes from. Well, that doesn't happen with the accordion. You're changing the volume. So because here the volume is coming from the bellows. So if what I'm doing is making it go faster and slower, faster and slower, which means louder, quieter, louder, quieter. But if you pay close attention to that, the pitch never changes. I mean, here's the pitch changing. That's it going a little bit flat. It's really hard to do on accordion. So that's one kind of tremolo. It's the kind of tremolo that you would get on the vibraphone if you use the motor, where you can set the speed of the tremolo. And again, it's just the air column is changing, which changes the volume, but so rapidly that you perceive it as a vibrato, but it's not really. So we use tremolo as a way of of describing that. So you can do, if you're not using your left hand to play buttons, you can do the tremolo with your left hand at various speeds. You don't have quite as much control of it if you're playing something. You have some, but much more if you're not actually playing the buttons. But besides that one, I've also developed some things with multiple fingers where I'm actually kind of shaking the keyboard. Can't quite figure out whether I'm making my hand go up and down or I'm shaking side to side. So it's hard for me to teach that technique, but here, see, I know that I'm shaking my arm if I do a slow one. I'm kind of going towards the grill and back towards the edge of the keyboard. Not with my fingers, but with my arm. And that causes the bellows to move and creates the tremolo. So that's not so much expressive in the terms of creating a beautiful sound, but it can be used to create beautiful textures. And then when I want to do something faster, that's when I get into very rapid shaking of the hand. And then there's also times when I can just brace the keyboard and do it. And if you can actually get sort of a bellows percussion. I had it a minute ago. And then there's this is the one that you only go to once in a lifetime, because once you've done it, you revealed it and you can never do it again. But this. I've been asked about whether I use special techniques on the accordion. Well, I consider that tremolo, it's not a special technique in that it's something that's never been used. It has been used, but it hasn't been used in all the ways that I've described. And it's not something that you build a piece around so much as a way that you can incorporate it into your vocabulary in other ways. And I tend not to do pieces that are studies in special techniques. That was something that was done a lot in the 60s and the 70s, and I played a lot of those pieces. There was a whole repertoire coming out of Scandinavia. Usually the repertoire for the accordion grows because there's a virtuoso player who commissions composers, and there was a wonderful player in the 70s, Mogens Elgaard, and he commissioned dozens and dozens of pieces from very interesting Scandinavian composers. And one of my favorite pieces was by Pierre Norgard. It was called Anatomic Safari. And each movement was a study in one particular technique, whether it was key percussion, use of the air button, which is that sound being used as a special technique. The reason I don't do them so much myself is because I've been there, done that. I did it a lot in the 70s at playing other people's music, and I did it in some of my own music, and now I feel it's time just to use them when they're an expressive part of pieces that you're writing, rather than to just highlight them as interesting sounds. But that being said, I have written one piece that's, the whole thing is a special technique, but it incorporates some of the other things that I do. It's called 11 Large Lobsters Loose in the Lobby, and it's from 1991, and it is also in an odd meter, 11. That's where the title originated from. And each pattern is a different subdivision of 11. So that's the way I organize the piece. but it also uses all the sort of special techniques that I learned in the Per Norgard piece. It uses this sound of the register switches. Slapping the grill or slapping the bellows. What I do depends on how far I reach at the time. The air button and registers on the left hand. So actually, I should never play any keys during this piece, although sometimes my hand slips and I do a key sound does get in there. But it's an all percussion piece, which I haven't played in a long time, so please be merciful. There's 11 large lobsters loose in the lobby.